Hello, everyone. And if you're here, that means you're here. Already got Manuel and William here. How you guys doing today?
I'm doing well.
All right. Manuel, you're just showing us your profile pic today.
No, no, I'm good.
Okay. All righty. So I believe both of you are stationed in the United States of America, if I know you guys correctly. Getting ready for Turkey Day, doing your pre-Turkey Day fast.
Fast.
Fast. Yeah, you got to fast. You got to fast so that you're hungry, so that by the time all the food shows up, it's actually enjoyable. It's a rule. I don't know if anybody told you that.
I'm not in the Americas. Look at the darkness.
Oh, I must have got you mistaken for somebody else, but I should have known that.
Yes, 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 yes. Sure.
I'm sorry your country is lame and doesn't have a national holiday tomorrow.
You're sorry that my country didn't need to be saved by Indians? Is that it?
Ouch. All right. Starting off. Oh, okay. Well, does anybody have any burning topics that they want to talk about, or were you hoping to listen to me talk?
Yeah, I just wanted to poke you a little bit. So
Okay. Well, I think you've already managed that.
no,
Some interesting
starting.
church news out there that oh, that's not it. Here we go. Pope Francis is threatening on a shared Easter date with the Orthodox. And yeah, this is, if you talk to your friend of mine, Sam Adams, he said that this was the most hotly debated topic in the early church, even more than any of the dogmas. And apparently, Pope Francis is feeling pretty open-minded. So I'll ask you, gentlemen, do any of you know how Catholics calculate the date of Easter?
No.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
what I
I've heard
thought.
it before, but
I would say that 98% of Catholics don't know how we pick the date for Easter, which means that this could totally change overnight, and nobody will notice. So perhaps now is the time.
How far is the Orthodox Easter?
Well, I think there's two complicating factors, right? So Catholics calculate the date of Easter by taking the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. That's how we calculate the date of Easter. And the Orthodox complicate that on 2 points. One of them is that they won't observe. This is something I read in this article here, so it's as good as this article. They won't observe Easter unless Passover has happened first. And very occasionally, Passover won't happen at that time. But the second is, I think, the Julian calendar that they're still using. They haven't updated to the Gregorian calendar, and I think that's the big deal there. Uh, so anyway, we'll see if anything happens. But they're doing it in Nicaea.
My opinion is that it's a good movement. I don't know why I should care about the calculations yet.
Right,
and probably people that have good reasons to care about the calculations, but I think unification in whatever element is a good example for further cooperation and should be embraced.
Yeah. Now they talk about whenever you're going to change a parish weekend liturgy schedule that everybody has to compromise there. So as long as there's compromise on both sides, I think I could do it. But if the Catholics just capitulate to the Orthodox, I'd be kind of like, do we really have to do that? Anyway. So speaking of Catholicism and Orthodoxy, here's Mark.
Yeah, I don't know anything about either of those things. It does occur to me though, why is there a relationship between Passover and Easter in the Orthodox Church? Do you know?
Because Jesus was crucified during the Passover celebrations, or before, depending on how you come down on the calendar question. And really, the whole first full moon after the spring equinox business, I think that has to do with dating Passover as well, because the Jews had that solar lunar calendar thing going on. I'd have to look that up, though. I'm not 100% certain on it.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I don't. You're the one that read that book. I didn't read that book, so I don't know all the. So the Orthodox are trying to preserve this particular idea that Passover and Easter are related in this particular way.
Yeah.
And
But
is this
because they
all-
have a broken calendar that does not work, and why they maintain it, I do not. It doesn't work. Like, that's part of the problem. It actually doesn't function correctly. So
the solstice doesn't occur on the solstice.
yeah, exactly.
So,
Exactly.
and is this all based on New Year, or like what is this all based upon?
So I guess there's going to be a big Catholic Orthodox gathering in Nicaea in 2025, observing the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea. And I guess this is on the docket for something for them to talk about.
I'm interested in the. Go ahead.
Well, I was just wondering what is the year based around, right? Because if it's not based on Christ, which might have been a good idea, but whatever. No, we're basing it on New Year, I think, right? So, yeah, what's the relevance of New Year in the Christian construction?
Everybody knows that New Year's Day is actually the feast of the circumcision of Christ.
For real?
On the 8th day after Christmas, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it used to be the feast of the circumcision of Christ until 1960, when John the 23rd changed it. Not bitter or anything, but that makes way more sense. So
I'm interested in the ecumenism of all of it, but my question really would be the American celebration of Easter, even though you know how weird it can be at times. How will that change if the Catholics just throw their way? Because we celebrate with the Catholics the American holiday. So
yeah, I honestly, I guess the funny point for me is that this would not even really be noticed by the majority of Catholics in the pew if we changed how we calculated the date for Easter, because everybody just, looks on the calendar and says, "Oh, that's where Easter is," and then that's as complicated as it gets. So yeah, but the Jesuits who came up with the Gregorian calendar, I think they calculated the date of Easter by hand without decimal points all the way to the year 4000. Just in case. So it'd be. I guess they won't care, but remember them. So yeah, I mean, I don't think a lot of people would even notice. But it was just a little news story that caught my eye.
So is that just for the sake of ecumenism or something?
Sure, yeah. Well, Pope Francis, he's got this line. So let us have the courage to put an end to this division that at times makes us laugh. When does your Christ rise again? The sign we should give is one Christ for all of us. And then he's got some more Pope Francis lines there. But I thought that was a decent little joke there. He's a funny guy.
That is a decent joke, but I don't trust him at all. So I'm immediately suspicious. Hermeneutics of suspicion confirmed here.
Okay. Oh, well, do you have anything else to surprise us with? Or?
Oh, yes, I know. Shock of shocks.
Oh, man. Are you going back up northeast for Thanksgiving, Mark, or you just
No.
staying in warm South Carolina?
I have no plans to go anywhere this winter at all. everyone's sort of shocked. I'm like, yeah, you guys aren't doing anything. So you're all still in your homes with your masks. And I don't even want to be exposed. I don't want to be exposed to the madness at all. And it's cold. And I don't want to be cold. So, and it's been cold here. It's been like, it was freezing the other night. I'm like, I got under 32 the other night. I'm like, what's going on? This is nutty. This is crazy weather for South Carolina. But we had a mild summer. So I don't know.
Do you have two homes, Mark?
No. It just my family's up in New England and I'm down in South Carolina. So there was a brief moment where I could have very well had two homes and been.
That sounds like a lot
Nicely.
of work to me.
No, I was gonna have a condo in Boston on the water, right? So I could get to it from the airport easily. I had it all planned out. I almost pulled it off too, but no. I kept getting everything stolen from me, so now I have to live like a poor person forever. So it is what it is.
Oh, blessed are the poor, right? Somebody said that.
Yeah, I don't think they were poor though, so I'm suspicious. Again, here's my hermeneutics of suspicion confirming.
Mark Lefebvre, suspicious of Jesus Christ himself, confirmed.
Yes. Yes.
Oh my.
Were you
So
born?
what are the Catholics trying to usurp Thanksgiving and turn it into some kind of Jesus fest of some nature? Is that what's going on?
It was kind of always like that. Listen, Mark, you want to give thanks to somebody. Right?
That's true.
Just give thanks. Just give thanks. Give it out to the universe, give it out to the subatomic particles around you. Just let the thanksgiving out,
I
No, you have
agree
to
with
thank
that.
somebody. So
I agree
Thank
with
you,
the
Eric.
whole gratitude thing. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, for making me realize that I need to be thankful. There we go.
but who are
Done.
you going to be thankful to?
I was
Did you-
thankful towards you. What are you complaining about?
Oh, okay. All right. I receive your gratitude.
Way to make it awkward, Eric.
I'm sorry. I'm bad at this. I'm new at this.
You're doing fine.
I'm
You're doing
trying
fine.
my best.
You're getting better by the day.
I think things got better once I implemented my my rule here that this is a no anime zone. So, sorry, William. I don't know if you're a big anime person. Okay, good. None of you have anime profile pics, so I think, yeah. Michael says he's been to the Plymouth plantation many times. Pretty sure it's a Protestant holiday. Well, here's the deal. All of the best parts of Protestantism were stolen from Catholicism. There you go. There you have it. Not backing down.
Necessarily true. Yeah. The Protestants try to take credit for things as if they were first at something, and in fact, they were first at nothing. So yeah, it's
Eric,
a problem for Protestants.
you're hurting my heart. You should say inherited. Like, you shouldn't make that division more strong. No, like they're little children and they're rebellious children.
Rebellious
They're not
little children.
He's
thieves
got a
or
point
whatever.
there.
They're children.
I don't know. I
And they're
feel like my
confused.
harsh and divisive language isn't patronizing, at least.
Something
Well,
about
but it's the father church, like leading the flock. Like
Yeah.
you're called father, right? Be patronizing, because like
Well, he's got a point there. Yeah.
something
Alrighty
about my
then.
personality makes the high church kind of difficult. I don't know what it is. We went to a Catholic church for about 4 months, I guess, when I was 12 or so, and I'm definitely if it's got smells or bells, I'm not really doing it.
Mm.
So was raised in a kind of went Baptist for a while, and then we went Latter-day Saint for a little while, and then kind of my parents stopped attending church. So here I am back at Southern Baptist, but yeah, it's been quite a adventure, but I just can't do the Latin or anything like that. So
Man, where did you go that had a Latin mass?
well, it was a small Catholic church in Athens, Georgia. I don't know if it still does it or if it was just a one-off that confused me, but we didn't stay very long.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess I kind of grew up with all the smells and bells, and so I happen to be a fan of it. uh,
I can see it. I just see Protestantism as kind of even though it started off with all the smells and bells, the Lutherans are kind of nuts for that, in my opinion. But modern evangelicalism, of course, tends to avoid that. So.
mhm.
Yeah, I don't remember any smells in any of the churches I've been to that have been Catholic. Just the Orthodox who just freaking fumigate the area, and there ain't no bugs in their buildings. My goodness, with all the incense they use.
Yeah, I'd like to use more incense, but got to run the program that I've got here. So I don't
Well, I
know.
think that's all important though. Like I think that's really important to change up the container. We were talking a lot about containers today because we did our group Lectio Divina practice. I hope I'm not blaspheming by even talking about this now, because it's not it's one of Vervaeke's adapted practices from the Catholic tradition, and then we adapted it further because we're all heathens. And we were talking about
Depends on what you're reading and calling holy.
well, yeah, okay.
We don't
Well,
do
William
calling
Blake.
holy there.
William Blake. Come
Sacred.
on. William Blake and Confucius. So there we go.
Yeah, I'm inviting you, Eric, next week. Wednesday.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I really, you might have found a red line there. Yeah,
What?
I
You don't trust these two guys that are like
these two randos on the
It's
internet.
just it's a practice. It's a Vervaeke. You got to figure out the Vervaeke practice. Well, plus we've improved on all this stuff, quite honestly. So we fixed the idea of practice as such.
Every
So-
once in a while, I'm like Vervaeke, like his work, like listening to him talk. Every once in a while, he gives me just a little whiff of something, and I'm like, oh yeah, he's not Christian, is he? And I think practicing Lectio Divina with something other than the Bible might be another one of them little whiffs. Little whiffs.
That's
for me.
interesting.
You only do that with the Bible?
Yeah, that's like my bread and butter of meditation right there is
Right.
Lectio Divina with the Bible, because there isn't another church or another text that the church claims is inspired by God.
I never attached those connotations. I thought something like the little flowers of St. Francis of Assisi would be appropriate for Lectio Divina.
Yeah, I suppose so. I've never done that.
you don't think that there's tons of inspired texts in the world?
William Blake? Come on, Blake. William Blake. Hello, William Blake. Come on. He's as what would you call it? I don't want to use the banal term religious, but he's as deeply embedded in at least Christianity and Christian thought as you're going to get. Like,
Yeah,
more so
now
than
you
most
guys,
people.
now you guys are really tickling my synapses here, because you're making me think, and I was not ready for that. Can you do Lectio Divina on something other than the Bible? I guess I don't know enough about William Blake anyway. We don't do poetry.
Oh, you've broken my heart. You've broken my heart. Everybody should know about William Blake. Come on.
So let's just go with your framework, which I already kind of don't like, but let's just say, right, like the Bible is the thing that informs you and like it makes you into the right frame, right? Then why can't you use that frame to look at other things? Like why would you only look at the frame itself?
Yeah, why is the Bible the only book, Eric? Why are we burning all the books? All the poor books.
It's
Why
Father
are you
Eric,
on the
by the way.
internet? Go back into the church.
Father Eric,
Quick.
sorry.
Up. Go pray.
Yeah, we have to burn the internet because
Yeah.
Father Eric says there's only the Bible and you can't read anything else. Good job.
Whoa, 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 whoa. You are now putting words into my mouth that I never claimed. Let me tell you my side of the story. My side of the story is I go off to seminary as a bright 18-year-old lad, head full of hair, clean shaven.
See what the Bible does to you? Oh.
And I go and I learn about the spiritual tradition of the Catholic Church. And this primary pillar that developed for me, the way that I spoke to God, is through Lectio Divina. God spoke to me. It's like that's the primary place where I go. And it was always strictly with the Bible. Now, last time, the Catholic Church started changing things very, very quickly. Everything blew up. So I am allowed to put the brakes on this and say, hold on, let me think about this for a minute or two before I go join your little cult or whatever.
No, we don't. We're not trying to get you to join anything. We're just saying.
I just got invited. I just got invited to the Church of William Blake and one of your liturgies.
Wow.
So just give me a minute to think about this, because religious people, by definition, shouldn't change very quickly. We are supposed to be the embodiment of the tradition.
Someone's wings got pulled. Holy cow. That was a reference to the poem that we read. So.
Okay. See, Joey understands me. Give me 300 or 400 years to think about it. That's right. After 300 or 400 years after the Protestant Reformation, Catholics finally started distributing communion under both species instead of just the hosts. He gets it.
Species? I'm sorry. You're gonna have to.
The bread and the wine, but it's actually the body and blood of Christ.
Right. Oh, you're saying that they were just doing the host at first, and weren't you doing the wine too?
Right. Not until the 1970s. See, the system works.
There was just a lot of whining, and then they were like, okay, well, wine too.
Protestantism equals exploratory fast boats. And Catholicism is a battleship, slow-moving cruise ship. Okay, Sam was already ahead of me. Well, if you like that framing, I guess you like that framing.
So I have a new show which is called Embodying the Logos, but according to you, I need to change my name now.
I don't know. I think it's probably all right.
Okay.
Just as long as you remember the OG who embodied the Logos in whose pattern you participate. And his name is Jesus. So
yeah. Reaching a little too high there, Manuel.
I need to watch more of your videos, Mark. I'm a little confused on your relationship with deity, or whatever you want to call it.
Oh, watching my videos won't help you with that, but you should watch all of my videos on navigating patterns, like immediately. That I can confirm. Very important.
I don't understand the Vervaeke language. I didn't think to watch your videos. So
there's almost no Vervaeke language in there, because Vervaeke language is crazy talk, and all I'm trying to do is fix cultural cognitive grammar. So occasionally I'll throw in a Vervaeke word when it's appropriate, but I try to explain them.
Yeah, whenever you use a word and you can't ground it in the conversation, you shouldn't use it.
Yeah, I try to avoid that particular mistake. I think I do a pretty good job, and I'm fairly precise with my language most of the time. Although Father Eric can get confused by anything, so he's always
because he only read one book.
Yeah. So if I'm reading your between the lines here, Manuel, what you're saying that is that if you don't practice Lectio Divina with the text, you haven't really read it?
I would actually argue yes.
Well, according to the way John has the practice set up, that's actually true.
Hmm.
because the whole point in and look, we're piggybacking off of his private Lectio, which he's piggybacking off the Catholic, right? It has to be a sacred text to you. You have to have read it and extracted all the propositional knowledge out of it, and then you can use it in the practice. That's the principle behind the practice. It's the principle we try to follow. We don't, we're not testing people, right? It's like if you have a poem you've never read before, well, whatever, right? We don't really care that much, but yeah, and we use, it uses a poem and then prose, which you could do with the Bible, right? Because there's poetic parts of the Bible, and then there's prosy parts of the Bible for sure, right? There's the more story-based stuff. But my two books are Norton Anthology of Poetry, where I almost always read, some William Blake, and The Wisdom of Confucius, which is a book about Confucius with some Confucian sayings in it.
So you guys can't conceive at all why I would be very, very hesitant to throw something else, some other text as being sacred. Like why that would create a little bit of hesitation in me.
I didn't think the Catholics were that exclusionary, but maybe they are.
Yeah, the
Well, yeah,
Catholics adopted like holidays from other cultures and stuff, right?
Yeah, that's after the process of baptizing them, which was it was frankly probably kind of violent. It's like, no, you are not going to have it this way. You're going to have it this way.
Yeah, but like the baptism doesn't change the propositional structure of the things that you adopted, right? Like,
in other words, you once you're baptized, you're probably reasonably immune from things like that. Yeah, sure. You don't want to go up and shake hands with a demon, but
So I was using baptized in a more extended sense, like they come into some kind of a winter solstice celebration, and then they just say, "Hey, stop that! This is what you're doing now," basically. So I don't know. There might have been a miscommunication there, but like the process of inculturation and the process of bringing things into the church, it's another one of those things that just needs to be done really slowly. Like I don't even trust books if they're not 100 years old yet.
Well, that's what Taleb says. So yeah, but the stuff I'm reading is 100 years old. So there we go. Like, yeah, I think that's a good rule of thumb. I think that the Lindy effect, as Taleb calls it, right, is an important way to determine sacred texts, right? Like, how much sacredness can it have if it was written yesterday, right? And then, yeah, where do you draw that line? And look, the saints wrote stuff. You guys are still using it. I don't know. Like the prayers are not all from Jesus, like
right,
or from the Bible.
Which is why I do think I have to open up the possibility of Lectio Divina with texts that aren't the Bible. Like, I don't think I can get around that.
Okay,
so the 19th century. I'm suspicious of the 19th century.
We're all suspicious, okay? Like that is a real thing. But I think you shouldn't do it with any text. Like I'm totally with you on that, right? So like I have my hermeneutics of suspicion as well, and well, part of the way that we're doing the practice is actually we're letting ourselves be inspired, right? So we don't let the text speak, we let the Spirit speak, and we're actually literally lifting up from the text, right? So it's the text is contextualizing us, right? Who we are in the moment, and then from there we get a mirror, right? We get a way of sifting out our thoughts into a frame, and then we can take that frame and we can step away from the text. And I think you want to do that with the Bible as well. I don't think you want to get stuck in the Bible. I think you want to lift out of. And then the question is, well, where do you get lifted to? right? And if your suspicion is, well, that can be a bad place, then I'm going to say yes, that can be. But like, you can get to that bad place through the Bible as well. Like, I don't think the Bible immunizes you from going to bad places, because that's you who does that, right? You're at the wheel, and you can say, oh, I don't want to go there.
Right, right. Yeah, you got to have the scripture, tradition, and magisterium all in the appropriate balance. Yeah, I will think about it.
Well,
I will
ask
think
up
about
the
it.
chain or whatever if you can
Ask up the
engage
chain
with practices that aren't. So I think you're good and baptized. You're immune. You'll be fine. Like,
You always can go to confession afterwards. That's the,
I do have that. I've got that in my back pocket.
yeah, you got a get out of jail free card. Just like,
Mhm.
use it.
no, it's not free. It's get out of jail after much contemplation and repentance. But yeah, it's not
No,
free.
the hardest part is you actually have to be sorry for what you did.
Right.
That's the hardest part right there.
I'm sorry I got into jail. Like, yes.
No, not for what happened to you, for what you did.
Oh.
That's the problem child part. Well, look, I mean, I know we had, I think Pastor Tanner joined us once for a while, but he didn't stay for the whole thing, which is unfortunate, because at the end, that's kind of the best. I mean, it's good to watch somebody go through the process, but then the interactivity at the end is important too.
Yeah.
And I would like to see a Christian do the practice like that. Like, I would be actually fascinated how that they would say that, or not do it differently or whatever. Or like what is this magic thing that they keep saying that they have this magic thing? So show me.
I mean, the goal of Christian meditation is to have communion with God, and that's basically it. That's what we're after. That's what we're shooting at. Hopefully, it works. So you guys have your very written art kind of framing around it.
Ooh.
Or I
Oh.
don't know. I don't know how to describe your guys' language. So
You're
don't.
triggering us. We hate Ritnar. We think
Okay,
Ritnar's
sure,
a dumb
sure.
idea.
But
But
you're
no,
not
you're
you're
right.
not using Christian language. You're not using Christian language. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, no, that's fine. No, but I mean, you're right. The problem with Vervaeke stuff in general is that it's very individualistic, right? It's all bottom up, individualistic. The guy in charge is always you, right? I mean, that's one of the objections that we had to the Lectio Divina practice, which is part of his meditation series, is we were like, what we really need to do is get this into a group practice, because the group practice is where private practices are bad for you. They make you solipsistic. No, right? So we have a group meditation practice. And after we meditate, we are still together and we discuss our meditation, right? Hopefully. And that was always really important, right, to us, was the group aspect, and making sure that the practices that John talks about are not done solipsistically, and that requires converting them into group practices. Because if you're not doing things in a group, you're not Ritnar. That's not a Ritnar. Good, nice, Joey. If you're not doing things in a group, you're not learning to be in a group. You're not learning to have intimate connections with other people. You're not learning how to cooperate in a community. You're not learning how to build a community, and all of that is bad. Right? Because the problem really boils down to we don't know how to get along, and getting along requires group skills, not private skills.
Hello, Sam.
Hello.
And I can't remember the name behind the username.
Xander.
Xander. That's right. That's right. How are you gentlemen doing today?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
Doing all right. Looking forward to eating far too many calories tomorrow. After saying mass, of course. But I understand that Xander's already had your Thanksgiving like a month ago.
Yeah, we did when we still had food and not snow on the ground.
Oh,
I guess you have that same situation. You got the snow on the ground too at this
yeah,
point, right?
but we have food.
Well, sorry. I mean, I shouldn't scare people about the state of Canada, such that it is. There is food.
It's just
I'm
all
saying,
been
but
harvested.
it's all been harvested. There's nothing left in the farmer's market except frozen turkeys stored for Christmas.
Okay. Okay.
I can understand why you might think otherwise these days.
Yeah. Price of eggs. Holy mackerel. It's bad news.
Yeah.
So I just want everybody to know that Michelangelo ruined Western art.
Can confirm.
Yeah.
No depicting God the Father. I'm in
No.
favor of that.
No. Bad news. Bad news. No depicting God the Father.
And this,
Sam,
this
I think we
whole-
agree on something.
Good. Good.
Yep.
Those 10 commandments still mean something, right?
Well, we Catholics use a different list of 10 commandments.
You guys got rid of the graven images part. You're right.
No.
Yeah,
It's from
I
a
got
different part of
those.
it's from a different part of the Bible where we get our 10 commandments.
Oh,
Is
really?
this a punchline or is this?
Wait.
No.
What? There's a different set of 10 commandments. When did
They're
this
almost identical, but it's articulated differently. I'll get it up.
happen? Yeah, please. This is fascinating.
These are the questions, right? Alrighty. Here we go. Present, share screen, screen 2, share, add to stream. All of our faces are now really tiny.
Oh no.
So I think this is the Protestant list right here. And here you get, thou shalt not make any graven images. And this is the Catholic list here.
Oh.
All right, and so we
images
use
part.
colors.
Deuteronomy 5.
Well, it is true that the 10 commandments do show up differently in 2 different places. All right. Okay, you shall have no other gods before. So even in Deuteronomy 5, so Deuteronomy 5:8, you shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above or on earth beneath or in the water under the earth. That's still right there in Deuteronomy 5.
Yeah, but Augustine.
So Augustine can scratch things out, I guess.
So anyway, that's a interesting little point there.
Was that like a constant debate in the early church between sort of the kind of iconoclasts and, well, I mean, I'll put both sides negatively, the idolaters and the iconoclasts?
The iconoclasts and the iconophiles. Yeah.
Iconophiles. Okay, we can do it that way too.
Yes, although I will say that in the pre-Nicene period, it wasn't a debate. There were virtually, as far as I can tell, no iconophiles. And that seems to be kind of mid to late 400s that we start to get out and out authoritative voices in favor of icon veneration.
Yeah,
But it's always a question. It's a spectrum, right? Like, you can go into my super iconoclastic church, go into the nursery, and find a mural of Noah in his ark with all of his animals, right? So is that an icon of Noah, right? Like, we would, of course, say, no, it's just the children's nursery, right? Kids like animals, so we have Noah's ark and the animals in the children's nursery, right? So, but a Muslim, or at least most types of Muslims, would be even against depicting Noah, right? Even in a mural in the children's nursery, right? So, and then you can go to like an Episcopal church and there's tons of, stained glass windows of saints, etc. in them. There's probably no part of their service where they ritually venerate them, but it's that, you know, I've been to some Lutheran churches that have some pretty elaborate depictions of Bible scenes and saints and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all over the church. So it's more of a spectrum question, I feel like, than a binary question.
And then there's like it doesn't necessarily need to be physical though too, like, but song, and you can make an argument that even song and ritual is a form of, well,
Right.
iconography. Maybe not a graven image, because you're not graving anything. Is that the verb?
Well, I think the problem is that you're fixing it, right? You're putting it into a form and saying that is the form. I think that's making a graven image. So if you're looking through the form, like I don't see the issue, and I think in the early church, right, like because they were persecuted, at least in the Roman Empire, like they didn't have the time to build a tradition and to build churches and stuff like that, because like the Romans didn't really like that. And after they got all of this stuff together, right, after they got capital behind themselves, then you can start making art, right? So then that question becomes way more relevant than when you're on the move and hiding
And meeting in people's houses and stuff like that.
Right.
Catacombs.
Yeah, I would say, I think that I'll dispel one thing that I think is sort of a Protestant myth, that the icons and the icon veneration was something borrowed from paganism. I think it's like a little bit true, but it's kind of mostly not. I think ironically, when Christianity was in competition with paganism, it was more iconoclastic, because that was a dividing line, right? When you have converts coming into Christianity from paganism, it'd be like, no idols, none of that stuff, no images, etc. But you really see the increase in the use of icons and I won't say idols, I'll just say icons, after Christianity is not really in competition with paganism. And so it's interestingly, I think it's sort of almost the opposite of the case, that when the necessary division between Christianity and paganism isn't as important, that there was less pushback on the icon stuff.
The winners get to make the rules.
So Vatican II recognizes the rays of Christ in other theological religions. And I'm wondering just about that, like, was it really like a lot of the things that were done was it really done just to appeal to the pagans, or that there was some truth of Christ in what the pagans were doing? For example, like putting Christmas at the winter solstice and Easter at the venereal equinox. Like, was it just to appeal to pagans, or is it because there's also powerful symbolism there, like Christian symbolism of having the annual cycle connect to the biblical stories?
I think a little bit of that, but I think there was also an added thing that we don't totally understand now of Christian triumphalism, right? If you can steal the important holiday and make it about you and not about Odin, right? That's a form of symbolic victory in the culture of Christianity over paganism, right? Like the center of the Swedish church is in Uppsala, right? And that was the center of Norse pagan ritual, right? Uppsala, Sweden was like one of the main meccas of Norse pagan spiritual retreat, where they would do all sorts of sacrifices and weird rituals in Uppsala. And the Christian church in Sweden specifically made the center of their church there. It's not because they were like, oh, paganism's all totally cool and fine, right? And we're just kind of going to gently smooth this transition from paganism to Christianity. It was actually quite the opposite. It's like, we are so much more powerful than the pagans that we can tear down their stuff and build our church right smack where they used to worship Odin and Thor and whoever else. And Odin and Thor can't do anything about it, and we win, right? And I actually think a fair amount of the taking over of sort of pagan holidays and making them Christian was in that sort of attitude, rather than the, I don't know, well, let's just smooth this over a little bit, and no differences here. Just kind of keep doing what you're doing. Change this word. Change this word. But it was sort of a symbolic Christian triumphalism that was behind a lot of that.
Like, one thing I do find very attractive about Catholicism is the way that we have like there's a cycle, like a rhythm of through the Christian year, right? So we have like the missals, and we got like a 3-year cycle, but we also within the annual cycle, there's a rhythm as well of like what Advent, Lent, but there's ordinary time and the feast. So there is, and within that cycle, there's sort of within the rhythm of the year, there's also like a rhythm of the Bible.
And if you go back to Catholic countries in the old world, it would get really deeply embedded. Like the Feast of the Transfiguration, that's August 5th, and in Italy back in the day, that was a harvest festival, and or at least one of the crops they were harvesting, and so they actually had specific dishes they'd make with like the fresh food that they had just harvested. That was like your transfiguration dish. And then, somebody came up with a way to link it to the actual, events of the Bible. And it's just, it all kind of came together, but really, I don't know. I don't know if the church calendar has quite as much pull as it used to. I feel like if we were being studied by an alien civilization, they would think that the most important calendar we have is the academic calendar. Because so much of our life is actually governed by the academic calendar. It's like, I know once school gets out that the parish is going to be cleaned out of like a third to a half of our people every weekend, because they're all going to their lake. They all have their personal lake, and there am I, just hanging out in Fargo. It's really funny. Somebody else is typing in my name. So apparently Ritz crackers are the secret to a good crust. And the academic calendar is more important than the church calendar. And I don't know how to fix it. There.
Well, but it's not the calendar that's more important, right? It's the materialism that's.
Well, you need the feast day
the
of finals and the feast day of midterms and the feast day of homecoming and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you are right, Eric, it's interesting that a lot of, like, especially when you're either in school or parents of kids in school, how much your life revolves around that. And it's like sort of descended from older calendars, right? A lot of our school calendars sort of based off of the needs of agriculture in the past, but not anymore, right? That's a good point.
Yeah, I do find it a little strange how it's almost the opposite of fair weather Catholics. It's when it's really nice outside, we don't go to mass.
And then immediately after something like 9/11, the churches are packed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't talk about
Did you
that.
literally mean the weather? When you said fair weather Catholics? I know that the churches in the Lake Country swell up during the summer too. They've got to have these transepts that they'll close off during the winter, and then they'll open it up for the summer. So.
Okay, so it's just basically your flock is migrating, and you're not migrating with them.
I guess, yeah, that's actually basically what's happening.
I'm sure the churches in Florida are more full in the winter than they are in the summer.
Yeah, no, I know a priest in Florida. He goes down to one Sunday mass during the summer because everybody's cleared out. He doesn't need to celebrate 2 masses. Yeah.
Is that in Florida?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, in the summer. Okay. But here too, like we have the snowbirds and that, but it's the summer because people go cottaging, and that I expect, where we have less attendance in mass.
Mark, would you say that hedonism is downstream of materialism?
I mean, it's separate from it. I mean, I think materialism, it leads to hedonism, right? I think materialism leads to a bunch of things because it whacks up against the wall, right? And then, you know, the things it doesn't do. And then your default is your ego. And so hedonism is one result of materialism because, you get the Sam Harris, well, it's all like, I don't want to deal with creation. So I'm just going to say, well, it's all predetermined and there's no free will. And
I would say Epicurean materialism leads to hedonism, but you can be like a Stoic materialist that is pretty different, right? Like, I guess Stoic materialism is almost like pantheism or panentheism, right? Where God's in the show, right? But if you have the sort of kind of, Epicurean, molecules bump together, there's no higher purpose, right? It's no higher purpose materialism.
But the Epicureans hated the Dionysians, and because they're aesthetics, so they're not hedonistic by default. They're like, you should eat just plain beans, and if
they were
you have 10
long-term
beans,
hedonists.
well, no, but
perhaps irritable bowel syndrome.
Maybe, but if you have 10 beans and your friend comes, you're supposed to share your beans, even though 5 is not enough for either of you, and you're supposed to be happy about it. So they're aesthetics. They're not. They weren't hedonists. That's the modern misconception of.
Well, they called themselves hedonists, but
Right,
they tried
right,
to be very disciplined about it.
Yeah, I was. I'm thinking. I guess what's on my mind is people who are absolutely hustling, 5 days a week so they can live for the weekend. Like that's the form of hedonism. I don't know. I don't have a good name for it, but I just see a lot of that.
Well, if you're an individual, right, not a materialist necessarily, although probably you're also a materialist at that point, right? Then what's going to happen is you're going to live for your own egoic self, right? You're not going to live for, right, because your aim is off. And so if you're just counting everything in the flat material world and you're individualistic, then your aim is back towards yourself. And so why wouldn't you? Because there's nothing in any spiritual tradition that doesn't talk about the positive affect of engaging with miracles or with things out of the cycle or out of the normal humdrum mundane sort of path of the, like it's in all the ancient Greek philosophies too, right? Like you're supposed to seek out that occasional joy, but it's supposed to be occasional, and we've turned it into a calendar problem.
So
I'd say it's a form of paganism though, right? Because it's going back to revelry, right? That you're preparing for the revelry on the weekend, which is in some way it's a source of joy, but it's a source of destructive joy, right? So you have to spend the rest of the week preparing for the next sort of cycle of destruction that is your weekend. Like you're sort of feeding your pagan gods, whatever they may be, right? And that's what you're really living for.
What is it these people do on the weekends that's so fun?
Well, no, okay. I want to reframe this because I think we're kind of in the wrong frame, right? So there's this idea of attachment styles, right? And an attachment style is effectively where do you get your comfort, right? Like what is the way in which you find stability in life, right? So you can find stability in your internal world, right? You can be an introvert, right? And in your introversion, you can make fantasies or whatever, right? Or you can play computer games, right? Like where there's an affirmation of your direct interaction that is fulfilling some kind of need, right? And that puts you in a state of comfort, right? then there is a way where you can do that in the social realm, right? So if I just appease all the people and my social status is high, then I feel like I'm a good person, and therefore, right, and that's kind of what's going on in society a lot now, right? Like there's this sense of like, oh, like everybody should be you should let everybody do their thing, and you should never have conflict. Everybody should be liked, right? So that's an attachment style where the external world is affirming you, which is better than the solipsism, right? Because in the solipsism you get this narcissistic tendencies where you can't really relate to other people and account for their view. But even if you're just relating to other people as if they are the thing that fulfills your need, right? You can still have this narcissistic relationship, right? Even though you're participating in a social game, right? And then there's also the physicality, right? Like, so that's what drug users do, right? Like they're like, I am grounded in my body in a certain way, or I'm oppressed by my body a certain way, and I need to do something with a relationship, right? Like thrill seekers also have that aspect, I think, right, where their embodiment is where they get their attachment from, right? And I think the thing that meditation did for me, right, is it's opened this door for being grounded in my body, right, where I could swap effectively from my introversion into a different way of being. And so when we're talking about materialism and when we're talking about individualism and all of these things, they're expressions, I think, in different attachment styles of the same principles somewhat, right? And yeah, so I was talking to Skylar and Nick, and they were talking about the ancient conceptions of what was it? Ezekiel, Mammon, and Moloch, right? Where they're representative of different aspects, right? So Mammon is more the embodied passion aspect, while Ezekiel is more feeling in control of what you're doing, right? Having the right agency, and Moloch is more true understanding, being in control that way, right? And I bound those things together in this ego, right? Like they're effectively what the ego is, right? Like there are three aspects of the ego in different dimensions, co-manifesting always in some way, because I think they're interdependent.
Yeah, maybe another way to think about it is the individualism causes you to believe, right? And this is where the postmodernism comes in, that you can frame something. And so what ends up happening in that case is that if you believe you can frame something, then the 9 to 5 grind becomes a grind, right? It collapses into your own point of view. It collapses into the solipsism, and that's why the individualism is dangerous, because it takes you out of the larger frame of creation and the creator, right? And what that means in terms of your role in the world, and to tie this back into to the question here, look, if when you go outside and you're interfacing with nature, you don't see the miracle of something like a butterfly being nearby, or the lizard that's running across your house or something, then you're really missing what miracle is. Miracle is all these things that you have no control over, no actual understanding. Like, I don't understand butterflies. I don't even understand how they fly. Yeah, they flap their wings and they fly. I don't understand that. Not in any reasonable way. I have propositions that tell me how things fly. Like, I get the aerodynamics. I probably get the aerodynamics better than most people, right? But I don't know. I don't know what it's like to be a butterfly. Like, this is Nagel's bat argument, right? And if you don't know Nagel's bat argument, you should look it up, right? Those are miracles to me, right? And being able to engage in the world where you understand that you're just this tiny little piece of this gigantic creation, right? That is so large you can't imagine it. If you think you can imagine it, drive across the Midwest in the United States, you'll quickly understand. Like, this place is huge, and this is only one part of the world. Like, the world is so vast, it's insane. And even your neighborhood is so vast, because you can always look at a different layer of detail. And it's that ability to do that is in sense half of the miracle, right? Because half of the miracle is what we'll say what's going on around you, and the other half is your ability to see, right? Is your eyes to see and your ears to hear.
Yeah, I like what you're saying about miracles, because I've thought about it the same thing, that there's miracles occurring all around us, and it's the problem in some senses that miracles are so commonplace that people ignore their miraculous nature.
Right. And I want to bring this back to Lectio Divina, where we started off, right? And why we made it a group practice, right? So what's miraculous around Lectio Divina, right? Like, so in Lectio Divina, you're trying to grasp at these divine principles, right? Like the way that the world works, right? And your place in it, right? And if that is not enough, you see someone else do that, right? And they're doing things where you're like, how did they do that, right? Like I can't do that in my mind. I don't see that trick, right? Like they're walking through walls for me, right? And then if you take another step back, it's like, how is this even possible? Like, how am I even understanding anything, right? Like if we're all having this really fuzzy, like touchy relationship to these things that we can't see with our eyes, right? Like how is that even possible? And that opening up, right, and being in that state of awe, right? That is a thing that you need to learn, right? Like that, because that Vervaeke talks about this state of awe that can swap to horror, right? And so if you're if you're attached to your ideas, right, and you need these ideas to grasp the world, right? Like you get a sense of security from these ideas, and you get confronted with, well, you think you're grasping, but you're not, right? You're just grasping air. Then that is horrible for you, right? Like that is horrifying, and being in that state in a positive relationship and having receptivity for divine revelation, that is what you need to learn, right? Like you need to be able to do that. You shouldn't be burned by the light of God. You should be filled by it.
On that, like the idea of grasping, and just maybe tying it to this idea of being bored of miracles, I think that there's something that's strange about modernity, or at least our current age, is this idea that everyone has a good conscience, or that we all innately have this infallible sense of good and evil. And it's not, because I think that in Christianity, and I don't see a lot of Christians emphasizing this, that there is an idea of Christian formation and refining your conscience. Like, it's not taken as a given that you know right from wrong, but that's something that's clearly sort of pushed in the culture now, that everyone knows right from wrong for themselves. And I'm not, I'm not buying that. Like, I think that that we do need to get back to this idea that morality requires refinement, that it's not, and training.
Well, when you're saying people know right from wrong from themselves, right, that it's implied that there is no right and wrong outside of people.
Yeah.
That's the individualism, right? And that's why I think the problem is not modernity per se, right? Although, maybe modernity gives you a pretty fertile field to make a bunch of mistakes around objectivism, materialism, and individualism. And the postmodernism just tells you, postmodernism is very sneaky, right? Because it effectively says all interpretations have value, but it implies that all interpretations have equal value, because it says, why are you privileging your interpretation over mine? And that gets into my felt experience and all this nonsense, right? And so what it does is it destroys framing as a valuable thing, right?
Yeah.
Even though without framing, words don't have meaning. Technically, meaning is not in words. Meaning, it happens from the content plus the context, and it's a transjective, is what John would call it. There's a fancy Blavatsky word for you.
And actually, just to connect this to postmodernism, because I've been thinking about this while we've been talking, but I haven't really figured out until now why it's so relevant to the conversation, is that Foucault had this concept of libidinal freedom, right? Which is really freedom to follow your follow the pathos, right? To follow your whims and passions and do so without consequence. And that's very much like the what we call the radical left. Like that's sort of their framing of what freedom is now, right? That you'll see this is it's freedom. Freedom is they sometimes mock the idea, but really they want it. They want freedom is freedom following passions, like eating as much as you want without having to worry about getting fat. Having as much sex as you want without having to worry about the consequences of that. Partying as much as you want, not working, being slothful as you want without having to worry about any of the consequences. But I think that the freedom, there's another notion of freedom that I think is more popular among conservatives. I don't want to necessarily make this a political thing, because I don't think it's not. I don't think it is. But there's this other notion of freedom that we don't really just make distinguished, but it is very distinguished. It's like the freedom that the Puritans wanted when they came over to America. It was attractive for them. And I would argue it was also the freedom that the truckers were looking for in Canada. It's the freedom to follow your conscience, right? Which is very different from the freedom to follow your passion, right? Or your path, to follow the raw pathos and expect to be free from consequences there. Freedom to follow your conscience is more about freedom to engage with God and come what may. But in order for that freedom to exist, you have to first accept that there is something as called that there is a conscience, and it is a value. And I think that fundamentally that postmodernist worldview rejects it, right? And there's a Gnosticism there, I believe, right, where it's like it's a rejection of sort of seeing that as a conscience or morality as a prison that must be broken out of.
Well, yeah, principles are a prison, right? They are, because they're everlasting, right? And the Greeks did not see the passions as a good thing. So, really, I mean, I can't say it enough. The ancient Greeks had it all correct at some level, right? Like, their conception of philosophy is correct. Everybody after them has the wrong conception of the word. Like, it's just not useful in the universe, right? They had a good conception of the passions, right? They had a good conception of the idea that you were framed, right? Because all the philosophies seem to talk about religion, not very much, or what we would call religion. They wouldn't call it religion, right? They all have that component, because that's the grounding to justify the philosophy, which is the bucket of ontologies. It's not an ontology. It's the place where ontologies exist. All the places where ontologies don't exist is what we would call religion. Right? They didn't call it that, but they took that for granted, because that was the ground of being for them. So there's the ground of being, the big O ontology, right? And then there's the categorization ontologies. That's philosophy. And each of the philosophy types. So a new philosophy is a new set of ontologies, right? For that thing, whatever it is.
I'd have to think about that a bit, because that's a very new idea for me. Like the whole framing philosophies as buckets of ontologies. But on that, I agree with you that the Greeks had a lot right with their understanding of the pathos, and I think that you see in the Bible like there's that's partly why the connection to with Christ to the Logos is so essential, because it's, you see it in a lot of places in the Bible, but the place that I always think about it is when Pilate puts the question to the Israelites, right? Or the Jews, like the choice between Jesus and Barabbas, right? And I think there, it's really sort of it's two paths forward, right? And one, Jesus is representing the sovereignty of the Logos, and Barabbas is representing the supremacy of the pathos, right? Which do you choose? Do you choose how do you choose to deal with the Romans? Do you choose the way of Christ, which is the sovereignty of Logos? So reason, your passions controlled by reason, right? By logic, by truth. Or do you choose to unleash your passions, the Barabbas, the violent revolutionary? Do you choose that path? And I think that like that choice you see so much, and even that, and very much in that sort of postmodernist center. Like again, it's that two notions of freedom, or two notions of the way forward. Do you choose the sovereignty of Christ? Do you choose the sovereignty of the Logos, or do you choose to put your passions? Do you choose to put pathos first and be governed completely, have the supremacy of the pathos over everything else? I feel this way, right? Is it facts over feelings, or feelings over facts, to put it in a pithy and sort of
Right.
capture less? But yeah.
Right, but that's individualism versus being a member of a tribe, roughly speaking, right? You can't have. I mean, the revolutionary is always an individual unto themselves, and then the mob just takes over, and that's why revolutions are always try to be manipulated, and it always fails.
See, I don't know. I don't think the revolution is. I don't connect to individualism, because there's lots of revolutions are generally, because it's the pathos, you're losing yourself to the mob, and you're losing yourself to the pathos. So I don't necessarily connect that with individualism per se, because it's sort of like it's a complete surrender of yourself as an individual, but it's driven by your own selfish desires. So there's that sort of individual sense to me, right? Because I see the French revolutions, you saw that very much. It's like there was always this person who would come up and speak for the collective, right? Where it's sort of like, I am the voice of the people, or I am the voice, and you see that today too with a lot of these revolutionary forces, where someone tries to speak for an identity or a collective. So they're not, in a sense, they're surrendering their individual to that mob mentality.
No, I think you want to reframe it, right?
Okay.
In what is the distinction, right? Like this, you can have authority in the individual, you can have authority in the collective, and you can have authority in God, right? Like I think that's the three frames that you can have, right? And if you have authority in the collective, you have an honor culture, right? Because now you're the way that you're regulating what's right and wrong is by social status, right? And so you can't transgress against your social status, because now you're cutting off yourself from being, literally, right? Like that's why people commit suicide when their honor gets breached, right? And what the individualist has is they put the authority in themselves, right? Like I and my feelings are the highest source of authority, and I should follow them. And then obviously you can't avoid putting yourself within certain constraints, right? Because you need money to buy drugs, effectively, right? So like you still need to participate in a way that you get the money in order to buy the drugs, or to buy your electricity bill and your internet bill, right? Like you still need to do that move, and that's why they seem to be able to participate in society, because they have to submit to subsets of society in order to manifest anything in the world, and which is a good thing, but maybe also a bad thing, because that also allows them not to have to change. And
Before we get too serious here,
I Well, I want to propose something to Father Eric. So on my channel, Agapic Orientation, I had the Dialogos happen, and the Dialogos, I had this insight where I was like, technology, or better said, psychotechnology, in the way that Vervaeke uses it, and psychotechnology is effectively a way of participating and intelligizing the world. That's effectively what a psychotechnology is. So you could go to what Ethan is asking about. What is all these buckets of ontologies, right? These buckets of ontologies are tools to relate to the world, right? And so if you have a proper psychotechnology, I think you're getting in contact with an angel. That's the way that I would frame it, right? So there's a subset of God that is revealed through a specific type of participation, right? Which would be the message from God, right? So if you're in right relationship to that message from God, you're tuned into an angel, right? Like you're receiving one of his messages. Now, I think that's what happens in polytheism, right? Like in polytheism, you have people that figured out how to read a subset of the intelligibility of the world and to correctly participate in that subset, right? But now you're stuck, right? Because now you're not triangulating yourself with different messages, right? Like there's not only one message, there's not only one intelligibility, and therefore your participation gets corrupted. And so yeah, I'm still playing with that. So maybe you want to say what you think right now, Eric. High heresy here.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's quite that heretical. So let me see if I can break it down. So a psychotechnology, if I'm getting this right, is your way of participating with a certain spirit or angel or intelligible pattern. Do I got that right?
Well, yeah, like I would say it's definitely a way of participating with a pattern, right? Like now the question is whether you want to extend that to angel or not.
Sure. And that if you become if you don't participate with the different patterns well, that you can become enslaved to them rather than being free to allow one pattern or the other to go.
Right, which is effectively dying to Christ, right? Like that's the alternation between patterns.
Yeah, and so it just sounds like you're restating the first commandment there. I'm the Lord your God. You shall have no other God before me. That we need to pursue the infinite. And once we get attached to any creature at the expense of the infinite, then we sin.
Yep.
So, Chad, there you go. Don't sin.
Well, something came up in my mind throughout that whole little spiel that you guys were all doing there. I was thinking of, because the passions were mentioned, but like even like you mentioned this like psychotechnologies, and you said when you participate with the psychotechnologies, but like sometimes I wonder, like the passions sometimes seem to be outside of the scope of my will, as well as sometimes encountering a psychotechnology, being struck by something, maybe being struck by awe, seems to be outside of my will, in like not 100% of the time, but often. I mean, or like a good psychotechnology would be like, let's say when I first watched Forrest Gump, and Forrest's mother passed away, and he's standing at the grave talking to her. That was like, there's a real powerful thing there that I can't really explain. Science might be able to explain some of that, but there's a real psychotechnology that I'm struck by. You could say, well, I'm participating in the story and watching the movie, But I've also had other instances where I'm just like at work and I'm on my way to a certain portion of a job site and I'm walking through a church, not knowing what I'm not even paying attention to the fact that I'm going to be walking through this church. And I walked through this Catholic church in Milwaukee, and it was stunningly beautiful to where it stopped me in my tracks and literally took my breath away. That was powerful. Now, that's the job of the angel, I would guess. And sometimes same thing with like these passions. I think there's an old Greek word. It's like, I think it's called logisme or logisme, which is like this idea of something like the passions having like this chattering voice, you know, and they are kind of beyond the will. Now, I could try to think my way out of it, but I just often can't. I might have to turn to another tool, which might be prayer. So like, this is why people like the Jesus prayer or other prayers like this, that they can kind of pull their mind off or pull their attention away from the logos me and turn it towards Christ. So yeah, because I don't like reducing all these different things down to my assertion of the will to either engage or disengage with either the passions or psychotechnologies or any of these things. So that's my big thing that I'm really on lately, because it's fascinating to me, and I think there's somewhere in there is a miracle too.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're pretty dead on, and you've probably had to fight for your knowledge there. And I think the appropriate way to think about the will is actually less like a rudder steering a ship and more like an antenna. And you can tune that antenna in and out of different frequencies. And you can decide, I've got this this feeling, this passion I'm experiencing, but this passion right now is not appropriate. It's not going to be towards the good. It's kind of out of joint. And so I'm just going to try and tune into something else, which is why, the desert monks, the St. Anthony and such would say with certain of these passions, the only path to victory is fleeing. That they, if you sit there and actually like, don't think about elephants, don't think about elephants, the elephants will come marching right in. And just especially even just going back to basic vocal prayer, the Jesus prayer or the rosary or something like that is a disruptive strategy.
Yeah.
I mean,
but it's tuning in. It's tuning into another spirit.
Yeah. So like, I haven't done it in a while, but it would be interesting to do this. It was suggested to me that when I'm in that something like that, this is before I tripped into you religious people. I was told to go outside, walk around the block, and if you see pieces of garbage, pick them up and thank God for them. And that's kind of like some sort of like really big prayer rope in some sense. It's a little more. Well, it's definitely more solipsistic. It's not as pointed, but it's adventurous. And but I am interested in like the disciplines of asceticism. These things like a prayer rope, and because I mean, I'm interested in them because I don't have those sorts of disciplines, and not as well as I'd like. I have a desire to know them, but I have a complete lack of strength to just throw myself into them. So,
but that's the strength and the weakness of John labeling things psychotechnology. So in John's world, a prayer is a psychotechnology. Yeah, okay, fair enough, right? But he's trying to science it, and I'm ambivalent about it because you're exemplifying the more important point, Chad, is that people don't realize that there are things that they can do as individuals, right, to give them the things that they're lacking, whether it be in intimacy or in framing outside of themselves or in or in the process of co-creating meaning. Like they have no idea that that is a set of skills that you can cultivate, but it's not a set of skills that gives you reliable, consistent results, because a lot of it is you're opening a space for you to have eyes to see and ears to hear. And over time, when you sort of suddenly, the eyes to see hit you for a little while, right, for a half a second, and then you notice the butterfly at your feet that just landed while you were on the phone, right? And then it's like, there's this whole miraculous world going on around me, right? When I'm doing what I'm doing, talking to my best friend, right? It's right there, but you can't, it's too overwhelming to experience it 24/7, right? You'd never get anything done. That's another passion.
The power
but the psychotechnologies are all about, like the savoring, for example, which is one thing that Vervaeke talks about. It's all about enabling that.
Right. Well, and if you experienced it all the time, it really wouldn't be that powerful.
Right.
Like I do the same thing with pennies, and I don't know where this came from, but somewhere along the way, I got it into me that, and when I find a penny, like it's God saying hello. And at first I wouldn't pick them up. I would just be like, oh, cool. And then eventually somebody's like, just pick them up. I'm like, okay. So, but yeah, there's one thing. Here's another interesting psychotechnology. Conversation is a type of psychotechnology, and this is kind of the thing, right, that we're talking about. But the thing is, we can do conversation all the time, and if we're not paying attention and we're not aiming with gratitude in our conversation, it would be easy to take it for granted, which we have done. But
that's the weakness of psychotechnologies, right? If they're not framed correctly, they're not going to help you. Right, and they can make you worse. So if you meditate solipsistically by yourself every day, that is not good for you. I don't care what anybody else tells you. That is not good for you. If you pray to God every day, because now you're in a frame, right? It's a type of meditation with a frame, with a larger frame towards the eye, with an eye towards creation. That is good for you, even if you do it by yourself. So it's the same thing, but it's not the same thing.
Right, because like the way that I've come to understand meditation, because I had a real difficulty with that word. There's all sorts of weird stuff wrapped up in that word, and part of it was just lack of experience. But it was shown to me that to meditate while bringing God into the meditation is to observe the potential for the day ahead. And then the whole act is between me and God, so that I might be able to be a better service to you. And so that's really kind of the whole deal there in a nutshell, because I personally am not the kind of person that can just go up on a mountain and meditate and be spiritual. I would just, it'd be so terrible for me to do that. Well, I mean, maybe the only good I'd be doing in the world at that point is separating myself from the rest of the world. But other than that, it's not really useful for me and for anybody else. So that's how I understand these things. Like, so when I say I find it very difficult to go into a room by myself and be spiritual by myself, it's not meant to be for me. It was never meant for me. It was meant for us. Like the whole idea of our Father. So we say our Father. It's not my Father. You know what I'm saying? So,
and I think part of what you're touching on there is like several things. Our Lord came and founded a church, right? He didn't just call individuals and say, "You come follow me." He called 12 dudes and said, "Y'all come follow me." And part of the plan is that they would be together, that they would be learning together. They would have these multiple different perspectives. That's why it's okay to have 4 gospels. And then you see this play out in the history of Christianity, where it starts off, monasticism starts off with these superhero monks going out into the desert all by themselves. But it doesn't last very long like that, because all of these other people want to come and learn from the superhero monk. So pretty soon he's actually gathered a little community around him, and he's teaching them, the few things that he's learned in the desert. And then they write that all down. And so now we have the writings and the sayings of the Desert Fathers. So even those things which, maybe the monks went to go out into the desert to escape the world, well, the world ended up coming out to them and then bringing something valuable back from their struggles. And out of all of that was born monasticism, which is, I think, probably the more safe and common path for Christian holiness, is doing it together with a group rather than going out and doing it all by yourself.
Yeah. Well, that's why I have such difficulty with I don't mean this with any disrespect. I really don't. But sometimes I find it really difficult to tolerate people who are so knowing in what they are doing as the only way. And it's like, I don't know, man. I think God is far bigger than that. I mean, so like do I want to be a part of 30,000 different denominations? No, but I want to find a home somewhere. And I think those people in the other 30,000 denominations, or even those people outside of a Christian faith, are included in whatever the magnitude of God's love is? Do I think that they belong? Are they valid in God's mind? Absolutely. And I don't know. I don't know. So what you're saying is, when you start doing the scaling of what you're saying there, so Christ, he starts with a couple friends, and then it moves up to a bunch of people, and then whittles back down to 12, or actually 11. And then it goes back up from there. And then you got these fathers. So then it scales, and it's just breathing in and out. And who's to say, right? Because one thing that Christ was saying was like, I didn't come to unite. I came to divide, or something like that. And I think about that, and I think, well, that's kind of what we're doing. But I don't know. Maybe I got off topic there, but that's why I like conversations, because they, like, when they're on point, they're about seeing the other and seeing the Father in each other. And I think that's a wonderful thing. But
yeah, I mean, you're putting your finger on a really difficult tension, and I think especially for Christians in our age is that there's kind of two extremes that people don't want to go in. The one extreme is that hyper-exclusivist extreme, where only the people on my boat are heading to port, and every other boat's going to sink, right? Mm-hmm. So even if you got a big boat, that's still every other boat is going to sink, and that's just kind of unacceptable, because it's like, well, is God really that incompetent about everything that he can't draw people in? That he's only gonna, only people who have this exact secret word and the secret handshake are coming in. So we want to reject that. But on the other hand, you have to be somewhere. And the only way to be somewhere is if you're not everywhere. Right? And so I have to be in a particular church on a Sunday morning, because I can't be in all, diffuse like a gas across the entirety of Christendom. That's not how human beings work.
Thank God.
Yes, that'd be pretty gross. And so I'll just tell you the way I've resolved it, Chad, as a hyper Catholic, as somebody who belongs to a triumphalistic tradition that says this is the one true church, is basically, yeah, this is the one true church, and God's letting all this other stuff happen. And if he's going to let it happen, then I've got to figure he's got a way through it. And that we've got all of these different denominations and all of these divisions and all these people who've never heard of Christ. And if God's cool with it, then I guess I'm going to be cool with it too. I'm just going to stick to my little piece of God's vineyard, and that's what I'm going to focus on.
I absolutely agree. I mean, that's why it's like that, along with so many other questions, are like, what I'm getting at is I get the sense that these types of questions are often so far out of our pay scale that it's like we're foolish to even glance at them. It's in some sense, because like those can be a passion too, and those can be an idol too. You know, like that's what I was saying on the other stream. It's like sometimes I think when we call other people's idol or beliefs idols, sometimes I think the act of calling other people's idols, that in itself can be an idol.
Yep.
You know, at least it's kind of like the idol of I'm right and you're wrong. You know, and I fall into that all the time.
So in the dialogues that I did, I was talking about scales, right? So you have the scale of the individual, you have the scale of the family, you have the scale of the community, you have the scale of the city, you have the scale of the country, right? And those scales, they require different language or different psychotechnologies to navigate, right? Because you're communing with different intelligences at those levels, and people are not able to see on all of those levels, right? Like they're not qualified to talk on those levels necessarily, right? Some people are, right? And we need those people. Like you need a king to rule the country, right? Or a president, which is a placeholder of the king. But you should wish that they are able to navigate that intelligibility on that level, right? And if you have idolatry on that level, that really sucks, right? But now it's like, well, are you able to criticize that? Well, not really. Like, did you spend how many years of your life to develop the psychotechnology? Do you have the participatory knowledge of being in the office and running a day to day, right? Like, no, you don't, right? So what is your criticism? Right? Your criticism is always limited. You might be able to identify what's wrong, but you're not going to be able to identify what's right. And yeah, like a big part of the discussion, I was trying to make the point, right? Like some conversations, some people, or even most people, shouldn't be in, because they're not for them. Like even this little corner of the internet, I think.
What, Manuel, gotta stop you right there. Here we go.
Oh, it's not for me.
Well, there we go. There we go. Number one rule.
Shh. Go on. Sorry, I interrupted you.
I'm
but
glad-
the rules are rules, Manuel.
Okay. The conversation is not for everybody. It's not productive, right? And if we go back to attachment styles, right? Like, well, some people get their attachment, their security from the social arena, right? So they need a spirit that is generated, right? They need a shepherd that is generating the spirit that they can participate in, right? And like, I think that's most people. Like, most people live on that level. They should live on that level, and I think it's good, right? Like there's a level of participation there that's valuable and definitely necessary, right? But that's when you can start building, right? And then you have someone who needs to take care of the community, right? And the communities interface with each other, and that needs to be taken care of as well, right? And the Romans had this figured out in some sense, right? Like, it's like, oh, you need to hold each office in before you can get to being a consul or whatever, right? And then you have participatory experience of the whole hierarchy, and I think the Catholic Church is based upon that model, right? Like that they're having that military structure as well, and so yeah, like when we have these attachment styles as well, it's like when you participate in someone else's spirit, right? Like, it's really important that you find a way to participate correctly, but you also find the people to participate with that have this right spirit, right? And so, and all of that is active, right? Like that is in some sense, it's in the flow. You're in the river, right? Like you're constantly manifesting, right? And then there's people that are more reflective, right? So they're inherently biased to not go with that spirit because they want to self-impose a spirit out of the name of justice, right? And now the question is, well, like what justice, right? Like what's the authority that you use for the justice that you want to impose or at least constrain these other spirits in the world, right? And so you can see different roles, and these roles are necessarily in conflict, right? Because that's why they're there. That's why they're necessary. And obviously, when you're inhabiting one role and someone is inhabiting the other role, you get frustrated, right? Because they're doing the opposite of the way that you relate to the world. But they're both necessary. And yeah, you have to realize, well, like where is the person coming from, right? And should I trust that person or should I submit to that person, right? Like, are they actually good actors of that role, or are they like coming from a place where I can't trust their authority, or better said, the authority that is channeled through them, right? Because like I don't think personal authority exists.
Well, you would be in agreement with Thomas Aquinas, so
Well,
it's nice to have independent confirmation.
I can try.
But part of the issue is the idolatry, right? Like you know, look, no single person can look at something and say it's idolatrous, because idolatry is in the relationship between the viewer and the thing. And so it's not like, oh, the idea of president is an idolatrous relation. It's not. It's not. For some people, it's an icon, and for some people, it's an idol. And you know, maybe it's easy to see when you look at an individual which of those two situations is true, but you can't scale that up and say, and therefore, right, it must be that way, because that doesn't work. But that's also part of the submission, right? Like, I don't know, for example, if Father Eric, although I do trust him implicitly, if he is correctly representing the views of the Catholic Church when he talks, right? And there's no way for me to evaluate that, and it's not appropriate for me to do so. Like, you know, it's just a hard no. I just have to decide intuitively, and put aside the pizza, which was delicious, and say, all right, if he hadn't bought me pizza, I'd still be trusting him, right, on this matter, right? Because that's not something you can propositionalize or evaluate as an individual.
Well, okay, yeah, and then sometimes it might be appropriate to step out into the wilderness and the darkness in a way that you wouldn't want to, right? So like you wouldn't want to necessarily reject your particular frame that you're living in, right? But then you have situations like I was really struck by Corey ten Boom has a book called Hiding Place, and I always bring this up, so if you've heard this, I'm sorry, but in that book, so she and her family hid away Jewish people and from the Nazis, and then they were captured and thrown in Ravensbrück Nazi camp or concentration camp, and she tells a story of, in the basement of that camp, every night there would be a prayer services, church service in there, very, very discreet, but with people of all different walks of faith. So she said there was Orthodox in there, there was Catholics, there's all these different, you know, obviously they're whatever, even Jewish people, people of not Christian faith, they were all worshiping together. And it was out of like this knowing, this very close relationship to desperation that would have them set aside the rules. And so I don't know, like sometimes I think this is why I don't like being so tightly locked into I think tradition is very important, but I don't think that it's always like the perfect answer. Do you know what I'm saying?
But it's not meant to be, and tradition doesn't pretend to be the perfect answer. But the question becomes, at what point do you figure out what you're going to submit to and what you aren't? because there isn't a condition where there isn't a submission to something that you don't like. And you could say, well, you need to go into the wilderness. Yeah, absolutely. That's in the Bible. Like, of course, it's part of the pattern of what John would call it, Vervaeke would call it perennial pattern, right? It's perennial problem in this idea that, yeah, sometimes we have to wander. Right. But that's a submission too, because you're wandering. Like, there's no state of non-submission. The question is, do you understand what you're submitted to and what you're not? Sometimes you submit to things that are terrible, right? Because some things are terrible, and we don't know, in some sense, how good or bad a trade-off that is, because we're never going to understand that, right? Sometimes you just have to hit a point, a pragmatic point, where you say, well, this is going to suck, and I don't know how much it's going to suck, but I got to do it anyway. And that's something like picking a faith. Like, which church are you going to go to? And it's not to say that you can't change churches or you can't not go to church, right? That's part of the perennial problem. But at some point, you have to say, am I going to do this crazy Orthodox thing for a year so that I can get in the club, right? Am I going to do this Catholic thing for however long that's going to take so I can get into the, like, at some point you have to draw that line and accept that submission.
Yeah. Hey guys, I love you guys. Thank you for the conversation. My phone's probably gonna die, so I really appreciate the conversation. It was really good. And check you later.
See you later,
So-
Chad.
Yeah, Chad.
I've been having conversations about going into the wilderness, and Mathieu Peugeot got asked this question, right? Like, is it okay to voluntarily go into exile? Because that's effectively you going into the wilderness because you want to go into the wilderness. And like I've been thinking and talking about this a little bit, and like I don't see why that ever would be a good thing, right? Like, you drinking the wine, right, which is a psychotechnology of losing control, right? Which is, I think, different than going into exile, right? Although if you get smashed drunk, that might be analogous to putting yourself in exile, right? But I think that's also highlighting the distinction, right? Like, there's a relationship to alcohol, which is good, right? Like, which is inviting the loosening up in order for the
It's an aid to charity, an aid to fraternity.
right, but it's also allowing to recognize the miracle, right? Like, there's a way that we need to open ourselves up, right? And that's the Sabbath, right? Like there's this point where we need to open ourselves up. We need to change our orientation from creating to creation or something, right? Like,
Right.
from having mode into being or even becoming mode, right? Like, where we are being informed by the logos to say, well, like, are we still on the right track? And there's different levels, right? Like, there's looking in your back mirror when you're driving in the car, right? Like, am I still on the right track? Like, so we're constantly in that pattern. And when we're talking about these different levels of participation in the world, like, I think you also have these different levels of participation in yourself, right? Like, so when I and Mark started talking about this container, right, like, I'm now in this conversation with you guys, and like, I might check my phone for a message or whatever, right? There's certain ways that I'm not in the conversation, even though they're not happening right now, right? Like, there's part of me that's committed to not in the conversation, but most of me is committed to in the conversation. So now I have an identity, and that has a specific set of rules. Now the question is whether I can actually fulfill that identity correctly, right? Like, am I attuned to the angel or whatever, right? Like, but I need to change this, right? Like, after this, I'm going to brush my teeth, right? Like, that's a different activity that requires me to be in a completely different way, right? Like, I'm now doing a bunch of things that I don't even have in my mind anymore when I'm brushing my teeth, right? Like, I'm completely a different person, and it's only by me stepping out into a different room and starting a different activity, right? And so that shift, that changing of identity is, but it's still on the same layer, right? Like it's still on the layer of I'm participating in this way because I got a defined telos. But then there's when you get the temporal extension, right? Like, oh well, like I need to travel, right? So now I need to prepare for the travel, right? And then like that is a different level of participation, right? And like now I get married, right? Like now I need to understand what being married is and what that requires, right? Like that is also a different layer of participation, a different layer of relating to the self. And these are interconnected, right? Because like maybe if I'm a husband, the way that I'm sitting in this conversation right now is going to be different, right? So that higher layer, or maybe if I get baptized and I'm a Christian, the way that I'm sitting in this conversation and the way that I am a husband are going to be different, right? So yeah, like, and again, right, like it's not obvious that we can look at other people and judge the way that they're participating. Although I think things like materialism actually allow some sort of judgments on that, but yeah. That's where you say amen.
Amen. Amen. Yeah. Yeah, I gotta have that flexibility, that finesse to deal with the world in all the different ways that you have to deal with it.
Yeah, and that flexibility or finesse, is facilitated by the intimate quality connections that you have around you, which is why it's important to have those. It's important to have that scaffolding and that structure. But it's elastic, right? It gives you the grace to be these other things and do these other things and screw them up, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the intimacy facilitates the flexibility, right? But you're bound to it at the same time, and but you need that.
And that's why when I was ordained a priest, was not sent out on my own immediately. That I go to a parish that somebody else is running, and when I get to a situation that I don't really know how to handle, I say, Father Dale, Father Phil, I don't know what I'm doing. Give me a hand here. And it's usually been pretty helpful. Right. And gives me a place where I can make mistakes or not really know what I'm doing, but that's okay.
Yeah. And there's your playground. That's
you
where
can't,
the play comes in to learn.
You can't really do that with a bureaucracy or a method or a procedure. Right. Like the procedure can't show mercy. That's a quality of human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Quality. Right. And qualities. And this is the problem of science. Science can't deal with quality. There are no tools in science, in ontology, to deal with quality. Ontology destroys quality explicitly. It's not, that's its purpose. It's supposed to do that.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a good thing insofar as it goes. But it only goes so far, and that's where the problem is. Science wants to go everywhere.
Yeah. Well, I don't even know does science want to do that, or do people get high on science?
Yeah, no. I mean, it's not. Yeah, I mean, science isn't an agent in the world, but the people practicing science, many of them being individuals, right, being individualistic, being materialistic, want to do crazy things like extend rationality. And yeah, that's a shot at John Vervaeke directly, right? Want to extend rationality because they want scientific certainty, right? And science is just intersubjective validation, right? With a certain level of accuracy and precision. That's what they want. They want accurate and precise intersubjective validation for things that are of quality and they can't be measured. They're not quantitative. They don't have a quantity. And you're not going to get that.
You can't quantitatively measure the best burger in New York City.
Right.
You could
Right.
have some quantitative guides. Nobody eats at this place. Lots of people go here. So, that might give you some evidence, but yeah.
Well,
Well,
and
my problem with that is it doesn't, right? Because
well, it doesn't work 100%. Like, it does give you some evidence, right? And that evidence is mostly, but again, this gets back to the quality argument, because everybody knows the best quality burgers in any city are not the most attended restaurants in that city. Everybody knows this. This is not a secret to anyone, right? Because everyone's got their little secret, best burger space. And for some people, they're absolutely correct.
Yeah,
And
but the problem
that
is
doesn't
that if you
count
don't like
grandma's
the
burger, right? Like
doesn't touch grandma's burger, and maybe you don't like the garlic butter that somebody puts on their bun, whereas other people think that the salty garlic butter is the best.
Right.
It's just what, and like, which of them is wrong? Yeah, which of them is right? Say, are you guys reading Plotinus or Dionysius the Areopagite right now?
No,
right now,
I don't
no.
read books.
You
Books are
can read
evil.
those and like
Yeah, this is the only book I'm reading. I did my chapter today, so
Okay.
that's it.
So,
Well,
Manuel, when you were talking about like gods and spirits and all that kind of stuff, I'm like, I hope he's not just making that up again, because like people have already been there and done that and figured it out. You wouldn't have to hack it all out by yourself. But if you were to do Plotinus or Dionysius the Areopagite, I would do Lectio Divina on those texts.
Oh, wow, a concession. Well, yeah, Plotinus might be worth checking out at some point, just so that I can slay the beast of Neoplatonism once and for all with facts and logic, because I'm getting tired of people making this garbage up, because it's clearly, I'm asking very easy questions and nobody has any answers. It's just,
Well, I'm taking
tired.
your critiques of use of the word modernity. It's like, yeah, that's a temporal category. It's a temporal category, has some use, but maybe not the best word for it. And then Neoplatonism is just the new Platonism, and that's another temporal category.
Right. It's not referring to a group that's cohesive, right? It's an identification. It's not an identification against, but it's also not an identification of, right?
Yeah,
it's
just
just this
identification
kind of
when.
arbitrary line in the sand, Plotinus plus some other stuff, maybe, right?
Well, if it would be sequential, right, like Platonism and then that which follows, right, I would say that would be correct, right? Because you can say neo in the sense of that which follows, right? And it does that's not necessarily a temporal category, but the problem is, right, like then there should be only one identity, right? Like there should be only one essence, and
Right.
and the Platonism or the way which, at least Vervaeke is using the Platonism, is that it is it's a psychotechnology, and it's like, well, yeah, but like if you want to have a psychotechnology that integrates with other psychotechnologies, right, then whenever you do that, like you're no longer the same thing, right? Like now you've combined two things into maybe something that's really useful, but now they're no longer the same thing. And then you can say, well, like you can translate it back, right? But when you translate it back to Platonism or whatever, right, or the essence of Platonism, then what are you doing? You're flattening it, right? You're making a scientific production of, and it's like, well, yeah, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Well,
It's like, yes.
that's assuming that there's anything in Neoplatonism that they're referring to that isn't in Platonism, and so far there hasn't been. Right? It's just all like, no. This came after Middle Platonism, and so it's Neoplatonism. And I'm like, well, what's the line between Middle Platonism and Neoplatonism? There really isn't one. It's all temporal. None of it is a group of people, an essence of practices. It's none of that. It's just not identifiable from the landscape, and it's not identifiable from the source. And so it's like, well, if it's not in conflict with Plato, and it's just maybe, because it's always maybe, because we don't have all that stuff. maybe an add-on to Plato that's different. Really? But we don't know that, right? We're just pretending like we do. And that's why when I ask people the easy questions, they don't have answers. And it's like, well, then maybe the thing you're pointing at is not a thing to be pointed at. Maybe it's not a strong enough category to be a category. Lots of things are like that. And it's okay. Like most things are like that. It's the postmoderns that think all categories are arbitrary. Not me. I don't think they're arbitrary at all. Right?
And so the problem I have with reading things, so this is one of the issues I had with reading the Bible, right? It's like, I can't relate, right? Like I can read the Bible and I can recognize the propositions for what they are, but like, that's not why I read the Bible, right? Like I don't read the Bible for the proposition. So if I read Plotinus or whatever, right? Like I want to know why it's relevant, right? And what a lot of these philosophical problems, like people come in and then they're stating this, like, well, let's talk about the Trinity, and I'm like, I don't know why. Like why is this a thing? Like, why do I have to be concerned about this? And so with the angel thing, right? Like, if I could reduce or confine the definition of angel to something, it's like, oh, right, like we have a channel of communing, right? Like, and that channel of communing can inform us, right? And that's a message of God if we listen in the right way, because we can listen in the wrong way, right? So it's not only that you have the channel, you also have to listen correctly to the channel. But it's like, oh, right, like that's a really useful framework in relation to sense making in the world, but it's also a useful framework in connecting to Christians and talking to Christians, right? Because I think most Christians don't have a good conception of an angel and what the use is and how that informs their way of being in the world.
I absolutely didn't before about 2 years ago. Just to let you know, ordained priest.
Did you exit seminary 2 years ago already?
Yeah.
So you had a whole education, Christian education.
I had a whole education. I didn't know what to do with angels. I believed in them because Holy Mother Church taught it with her authority. But I was just like, I don't know what to do with these angels. I guess they show up and do things for God. Yeah. So, and that was just, I didn't really understand the tradition behind it, because so the things that I did know, the little propositions that had gotten lodged in there, as I've listened to Peugeot and Vanderklay talk about these things more, so everything I actually did learn propositionally about angels is like, oh, now that makes sense. Now there's actually a container for that information that I was given. And then like, yeah. So it's all being unfolded now. But in terms of like actually useful knowledge, I wasn't really anything all that useful for it.
Right. If you have objects, right, and you don't have a framework to put them in, then they can't contain any meaning, right? Because they don't contain meaning, right? The meaning pops out from that relationship of the context or the framing plus the content. So if all you have is content, you don't have anything. And so that's the postmodernism sneaking in and destroying the church, because the church should be giving you all this framing. And that's part of the problem. Like that framing is what we're missing. And the reason why I don't like post-Platonic is because the whole problem is that we keep trying to get past something we cannot get past because it is correct. Plato was right. Like, he just was. Everybody who's tried to get past him has noticed themselves, and maybe Nietzsche didn't admit it, but he certainly noticed that Plato was already there everywhere he went, right? And Heidegger knew full well that Plato was already there, right? And we keep wanting to go past that point. That is not a point which you can pass. And you don't need to. Bad news, you can't pass it. Good news, you don't need to. Like, it's not a necessary thing in the world. And this is where people get wrapped up. It's like, oh, well, you know, I have to find the perfect church. No, you don't. Because it doesn't exist anyway. Like, bad news, the perfect church doesn't exist. Good news, a perfect enough church exists, and you can submit to it, and it will be okay. And it'll be better if you do than if you don't. If you keep looking for the perfect, it'll be the enemy of the good. And we're living in that era, or error, as I would call it, right? And it's the postmodernism, this destruction of frames as value, because once all frames have equal weight, they're not valuable anymore, right? They can't. Value comes from inequality. There's no value in equality definitionally. It destroys value. So you can't make frames equal. You can't make people equal. You can't do that. You can't make religions equal. You can't make churches equal. You can't do any of that. You know, but you shouldn't, and you don't have to. And it doesn't, because we're lesser fallen creatures and we're limited, having something closer to our level is better, right? Having an imperfect church is better because the imperfect church is closer to us than the perfect church would be.
Be allowed to be a member of the perfect church.
Speak for yourself.
Oh man.
So I want to respond to what the chat is saying, right? Like, why are we concerned about how long a day is in Genesis, right? And I think what is that question? Well, it's framing the framing, right? Like, okay, they're talking about a day. How do we understand the day? Like, because it's not obvious, and I think it's a proper concern, right? I think people express and go about the concern the wrong way, but to be concerned about that, like, do I need to take day literal? Like asking yourself that question, like, what is literal and what is not literal, right? Like, and playing with that, I think, is a really, really good impulse, because when we're talking about hermeneutics of suspicion, right? Like, hermeneutics of suspicion is effectively rejecting that flexibility and saying, well, no, there's only one way of interpreting what a day is, and therefore, but when you realize that you don't have to have only one way of interpreting what a day is, then you can become more open, right? Like, it's not that you have to let go of suspicion, but there's now a potential that you can participate in without having to lock down in this defensive modality where it's, I'm going to reject what you're saying because there's no frame that can hold what you're saying. Like, there is a frame that can hold what the other person's saying often, right? That doesn't mean that they're right, but there is a frame, and I can find the frame and I can participate with it.
Alrighty. I think it's been good. I'm glad you guys have hung with this. I think my my participation jar is now empty, and another jar is full, and I'd have to go attend to that. So just remember that this is a no anime zone, and also, shh, nobody wants to hear about it. Shh.
Is it the swear jar?
I am happy that you did this, Father Eric, and I'm thankful for your participation and the ability for me to participate. And I'm looking forward to tomorrow being more thankful but now with food. So it'll be lovely.
But now with food. All right.
Yeah.
And
And
have
I'm
fun.
thankful about recognizing the ability to be thankful.
It's good. It's good. It's all good. God is good. Amen. Good night.
All the time.
Good night.
Good night.